of Somalia and call on the distinguished representative of Jordan.
سيد الرئيس إن هذا المؤتمر هو مؤتمر الموئل.
Mr. President, this is a conference of the United Nations on Human Settlements, the Habitat Conference. This is the very title which we find on all the documents before us. This is not a conference convened by certain countries. The United Nations are the only forum which determines the relationship of member countries. The United Nations adopts political resolutions and has consecrated human rights. Human settlements cover shelter, housing, and also cover the right of man to live in his country, in freedom, in mobility. If we cannot live on our native land, what is the purpose of this conference? That is why we feel that the points now being raised and the considerations to the effect that we should skip the so-called political question are not acceptable. That is why we approve the Cuban proposal, which covers all considerations dealing with human settlements, be they political or technical. Thank you, sir.
Thank the distinguished representative of Jordan. There has been a request for a vote. Yes, there has. I recognize the representative of the distinguished representative of Democratic Yemen.
Mr. President, do I understand that we're going to vote? Is
The distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to propose that the rule of procedure, Rule 31, not apply in voting. And I'd like to suggest that we adopt amendments, we vote on this, adopt the Cuban amendment by a simple majority vote.
I thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan and call on the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
Thank you. A short while ago, I asked a question, and I thought that this part should be considered before we voted. Because before we dealt with the report, because this is an amendment to report, and you felt otherwise, and accepted your ruling. But it seems to me that so far, and in all conferences, we agree that we should try to have a general consensus with the reservations of delegations wishing to do so, and that is how we should conduct our work. Now, with respect to the amendment submitted by Cuba, as yet, I have not heard, and please correct me if I am wrong, sir, I have not heard anyone who has asked that we change our procedure for dealing with this amendment, as we did when we accepted the report in general. Therefore, I think we would be making matters much simpler to consider this document as being accepted by consensus and noting the reservations made by delegations who spoke up, and I think that that would make our work easier. However, I must make it clear that if we do vote, I would not be opposed to the point of order made by the distinguished representative of Pakistan to find some other way of dealing with Article 31, which deals with voting. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia. I thought there had been information or advice that a vote was requested. If there is consensus and no request for a vote, of course, the conference is its master. I call now on the distinguished representative of Congo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation and I myself, we have followed very closely the statements made by previous speakers dealing with the amendments submitted by Cuba. We are somewhat surprised, Mr. President, to see that we speak of human settlement planning without fully associating the popular masses for whose benefit this human settlement planning is supposed to be done. Mr. President, how can we speak of popular participation if the masses for whom such a planning is supposed to be worked out on human settlements are kept on the sidelines and live under intimidation, racism, in other words, in fear, coercion, under threats of the foreign occupier, the militarist occupier, and even a colonialist occupier? That is why, Mr. President, we very strongly spurn the thesis put forward by some honorable delegates at this conference, designed to exclude from this conference why leave out the so-called political essence of this conference? Why is this a political conference? This is a highly political conference because many delegations are led by ministers, and even we have heard here the delegations of the Prime Minister of Canada. This shows you the highly political nature of our conference. That is why my delegation support wholeheartedly, without any reservation whatsoever, the amendment presented by the friendly delegation of Cuba. And we want this conference to adopt it unanimously. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Congo and call on the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Mr. President, I have not asked for the floor, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey very much. I now call on the distinguished representative of the Netherlands.
Mr. President, as you indicated that a request for a vote was made, I formally request, in accordance with Rule 33 of the Rules of Procedure, a roll call vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I recognize the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
President, thank you very much. But before we proceed to the vote, I'd like to have a decision on the proposal made by me that the rule of procedure number 31 be waived and that we go by majority vote rather than the two-third vote. I'd like a decision on that before we proceed to voting as proposed. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan. I now recognize the distinguished representative of Morocco.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Pakistan delegation has just made a concrete proposal, to wit, that the voting on the Cuban amendment should be conducted by a simple majority. I believe it would be good, before we vote, that the Assembly take a decision on the proposal made by the Pakistani delegation, which my delegation supports fully.
I thank the distinguished representative of Morocco. In the absence of other speakers and before proceeding with the vote, to clarify the proposal by the distinguished representative of Pakistan, it would be my view that we should put this to a vote. I would determine whether it's considered a matter of procedure or a matter of substance. I call on the distinguished representative of Libya.
شكرا سيد الرئيس حسب اقتراح
Thank you, Mr. President. In keeping with your proposal, we must not forget paragraph 2 of Article 31, which provides that the conference shall settle all procedural questions by a simple majority of members present. In other words, the Pakistani proposal calling for a majority vote, this proposal must be voted upon by a simple majority. Thank you, sir.
That's quite correct. The procedural vote requires a simple majority to determine whether it's treated as a procedural vote. The distinguished representative of Pakistan.
I'm sorry to come back again, but since we are going to vote on a matter of procedure, it has occurred to me that we might as well put this proposition to the vote that all amendments to the reports we are going to consider be to all amendments, Rule 31 not apply, and we work on the principle of a majority decision on all amendments coming up on the reports to be considered, rather than my having to come back over and over again, if that is agreeable. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, I thank the distinguished representative from Pakistan. It would seem to me that we follow the rules of the conference, and these rules are changed only by exception by the conference. I call on the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
Thank you. Before voting, we must clear matters up so that all colleagues at this meeting know exactly what we are going to vote about. If I have understood correctly the proposal made by the distinguished representative of Pakistan, he is raising a point of order dealing with Article 31, which provides in the first part, and I quote, "Unless the conference decides otherwise, decisions of the conference on all questions of substance shall be settled by 2/3 of members present and voting." Now, if I have understood it rightly, he is raising a point of order, a procedural point, and would like to have this conference, our conference, that we should decide that insofar as paragraph 1 of Article 31 is concerned, we decide to accept a simple majority on all questions that will be voted, all substantive matters. Now, since this is a procedural point, to adopt it, we just need a simple majority to do this. Now, if this is the proposal, if I have understood it rightly, if that is what Pakistan wants, as it has been seconded by Morocco and Libya, I should like to support their motion and to ask that we vote on this procedural point, which would be settled by a simple majority, which would decide upon what majority we shall use. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia and call on the distinguished representative of Algeria.
Je serai très bref, Monsieur.
I shall be very brief, Mr. President. I support wholeheartedly the proposal made by the delegate of Tunisia.
I thank the distinguished representative of Algeria. The proposal is that the conference vote on accepting all amendments by simple majority. That is the first and procedural motion. We shall now proceed with the vote. Those in favor of the motion will please raise their hands. Point of order. Is he from
Señor
the
Presidente.
distinguished representative of Cuba? Point of order?
Sí,
Yes, Mr. President, a point of order. If we understand the situation correctly, at the present time, we are now voting upon the proposal made by the delegate of Pakistan that we do not apply the two-thirds yardstick, but rather a simple majority. This proposal must be adopted according to Article 31 by a simple majority as well. Is that the situation, sir? Is this right?
That is the situation. We are first voting whether, at this time, on whether such amendments, all amendments, be treated with a simple majority. The distinguished representative of Algeria.
Je voudrais simplement.
Please confirm that this applies not only to amendments, but to all decisions of the conference. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Algeria. The distinguished representative from, where was it? I'll call on the Secretary of the Conference to clarify the vote before we take it so everybody is absolutely certain what they're voting on.
Mr. Chairman, as the situation appears to me, the proposal is following. The Rules 31, which was adopted earlier by the conference as rules of procedure, provides that unless the conference decides otherwise, decision of this conference will be on substantive matter will be taken by two-thirds majority of the representative present and voting. There has been a proposal by the distinguished delegate of Pakistan, supported by other delegates, that this rule, which was adopted earlier by the conference, should be changed, and all decisions on the substantive matter to be adopted by the conference should be adopted by simple majority. Now, in order to decide on that article, this question is, it has been said that it's a procedural matter. Therefore, what has been requested on this issue, we have to decide according to the paragraph 2 of Article 31. Namely, now the delegations will take a vote on a simple majority on this question. Namely, to alter Article 31, paragraph 1, to be read from now on, that the conference will decide on the decision of the conference by a simple of majority. This is my understanding, sir.
The distinguished representative of Australia.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sure that with the large amount of work we have to do, delegates do not want to speak at great length in support of amendments, or least of all to engage in a procedural wrangle. A proposal was put originally
Do I hear a point of order? The distinguished representative of Israel.
Microphone, please, microphone.
I just asked, the microphone did not seem to be working. I would ask the distinguished representative of Israel
Okay,
if
it's
he
a
would
mic
repeat.
and anyhow not the translation. I want to draw the attention of the distinguished delegates in the conference to Rule 35. The title is Conduct During Voting, and Rule 35 reads, after the President has announced the commencement of voting, no representative may interrupt the voting except on a point of order in connection with the actual process of voting. I believe that we started already the voting as such, and if at all, and I have many thoughts about it, there could be on the floor a changing of procedure without being before in deliberations in a committee. Anyhow, Rule 35 stands. And I ask the chair, Mr. President, if he intends to continue also according to Rule 35.
I thank the distinguished representative of Israel. The voting had not actually started, I don't believe. Delegates were speaking to the vote as I perceived it. The distinguished representative of Tunisia. I'm sorry. The distinguished representative of Australia to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I was saying, I'm sure we don't want to spend a lot of time on procedural wrangles at this hour of the night. The proposal was initially made that Rule 31 be amended, or the second provision be taken account of in respect of this amendment, the first amendment being moved. Subsequently, that was altered, as I understood it, by the delegate of Pakistan to suggest that in order to save time, all amendments being discussed tonight would be so handled. People have their own reasons for making proposals. In fact, I had heard nobody disagreeing with that proposition. And there would seem to be merit in taking a single decision to apply to similar amendments in the course of the evening, and the vote could proceed on that. However, before we proceeded to the vote, and I hope I've not got this wrong, and I understood that the representative of Algeria sought an amplification that would serve to extend that majority rule to all decisions of the conference. Now, I would ask that people reflect carefully on this. This would have the effect throughout the conference of taking a decision to suspend Rule 31. We can't tell what sorts of problems may lie ahead. There may be items of much greater degrees of substance than an amendment. I think it would be going a considerable distance in our procedures to try to foresee all possible eventualities and suspend the two-thirds majority rule without any explanation of the reasons for it. No one has asked for nor sought reasons for suspending it in the case of these amendments. But I do think that caution is desirable in this matter if we are to preserve the ordinary bases of operation and the normal adherence to the rules which, after all, were adopted. So then, in brief, Mr. Chairman, I would ask delegates to reflect before contemplating waiving Rule 31 in respect of all decisions of the conference, and that this vote proceed as it was originally proposed, as subsequently amended by the delegate of Pakistan, to apply merely to the amendments that might be moved and voted on this evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia and call on the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
Thank you, sir. Once again, we need to have recourse to your wisdom to clarify the situation. It's certainly clear to me, sir. With your permission, I'd like to place matters in their chronological order. First of all, the delegation of Pakistan raised this point of order, and I spoke afterwards to request the conference, as we did previously, to proceed by consensus and to record the reservations of certain delegations. You gave me the floor to say that. I added that if there were no consensus, I would not be against the proposal of Pakistan. Now, after he reformulated it, I asked for a clarification, and deliberately, sir, I read out, in order to avoid any doubt, I read out the paragraph. It doesn't speak either of amendments or whole proposals. It speaks of questions of substance. What Pakistan was asking, and what I read out, the first paragraph, which related to all questions of substance, which are generally taken, as we know, on the basis of a two-thirds majority. So Pakistan was asking that on questions of substance, with regard to this particular amendment, this rule should no longer apply and that a simple majority should apply. So with all respect that I owe to my distinguished friend, the distinguished representative of Australia, we shouldn't really waste time quarreling about words. It's questions of substance here, whether they be amendments or whole proposals. So I would ask you, sir, to enable us to vote immediately on this question of substance, which was duly and properly submitted. This rule does no longer apply, and we might be able to accelerate somewhat the work of this conference. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished delegate for Tunisia. I rule this a matter of substance. So then the ruling becomes one of confidence in the chair. I have sat here and worked for years developing a conference on human settlements to which many people have devoted the better part of their lives for a few years. Highly dedicated people. I think of the people of Canada who I represent and who are hosts here, who have looked forward to this conference, and I have promised them that it would be one that would deal with the conditions not only in Canada, but of people around the world who we should help, and whose hand we hold up out in love and friendship and brotherhood. I understand and am deeply concerned about the issues that divide us. They are not within the competence, in my view, of this conference. I worry about the children in the Palestinian refugee camps. I worry about the babies in the Mathare Valley in Nairobi. My heart bleeds for them as we sit here and take a conference which can have immense effect on mankind in the years ahead, for many years ahead, and deal with political issues which will be forgotten in many years ahead, and there will be new political issues. And yet we say we're here to look after the needs of mankind. I cannot accept that as a procedural matter. To me, it's a moral matter, a matter of whether this conference is to proceed, whether the people of at least my country are going to remain faithful to the pledges that I have given on their behalf, that we are concerned about the rest of the world, whether we are going to accept every possible amendment, rules that were agonized over in preparatory meetings because they had a purpose, because they reflected what a lot of hard-working men and women felt, and reflected the rules as I understand them, although I am far from an expert, of the General Assembly, and we're there for a purpose. And at the very beginning, when we get to these issues, we throw them aside to a simple majority without any consideration of the thought and work that has gone into this. So I, as your chairman, remain concerned about human settlements. I remain concerned about my brothers in every part of the world and my sisters. I remain even more concerned about the babies that are coming in the years ahead, that I, as an individual, want to work for and am deeply concerned about, and which I know the people of my country are. And when I went around to your countries and we talked of this thing, we spoke about the babies and the squatter settlements and the filth and the water and the filthy water that we want to clear up. And my country, through the distinguished leader of the delegation from my country, has made commitments on behalf of our country. So to wipe this aside, to take every rule, one right after another, every opportunity, not because there isn't concern about those global issues, but because we really aren't competent to deal with them. The distinguished delegate from Costa Rica put it well. We are here because we're concerned about human settlements. I realize it's a difficult decision for us to make as individuals, where the political decisions directly relating to our human settlements start and the others leave off. But I think we do know what we can resolve or cannot resolve. And if we in this conference can't direct ourselves to the mandate, and as it was commented upon by the Secretary General Kurt Waldheim following the opening of this conference, of the mandate to which we are directed and the work we must do if we're to be faithful to the people we represent and the children of the future and generations to come, I must tell you that I consider this a matter of substance and not of procedure, and I regret having given me your confidence that you will have to express that confidence one way or another, and this conference will deal with the issues about which we're deeply concerned, so that we can go on and deal with more issues that involve mankind, and agonize as we must, and disagree as we must, in the General Assembly and in the Security Council. But for the sake of God and the sake of our children and future generations, I beg you, and I don't beg easily, to stay with what this is about, to do what we can do and not try to do what we cannot do. We'll now call the vote. Those in favor of the proposal and document put forth and explained by the Secretary of the Conference will please raise their hands. The vote has started. I have called the vote. I have called the vote. I'm sorry. I recognize the distinguished member from delegate from Iraq, and I believe that there is some clarification required about precisely what we're voting on. I'll listen to the point of order of the distinguished representative from Iraq.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. I have listened with the closest interest to your kind words. But I am one of the members of this conference, and it's not up to me to decide on the procedure to be followed by the conference. We already decided that in the rules of procedure, provisional rules of procedure, and we have to respect what we've already decided. From what you said in your benevolent statement, I understood that you think that this vote on a question of procedure should be one of a question of important substance which requires a majority of 2/3. And I think this should be decided by the conference itself in accordance with paragraph 3 of Rule 31. So that if you or any other delegation requests that we decide on the nature of this question, the conference should decide it in accordance with paragraph 3 of Rule 31, which reads, subject to Rule 16, if the question arises whether it matters one of procedure or substance, it shall decide by the conference by a majority of the representatives present and voting. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Iraq. He has helped me clarify precisely what the position is. I was referring to Rule 31, Section 3, which reads, subject to Rule 16, if the question arises whether a matter is one of procedure or substance, it shall be decided by the conference by a majority of the representatives present and voting. And that's why I would like to clarify for the distinguished delegate, because in my emotion or passionate love, I referred to this, although not by number, that the question arising whether it is one of procedure or substance. It's not normal, I don't believe, for the chair to make that ruling. It's usually one of the delegates, because that invites a challenge to the chair. But that was the intent. I thank you. We shall now proceed with the voting. I will ask the Secretary of the Conference to clarify this precisely, because I am somewhat more interested in substance and procedure, and very little expert in procedure, sometimes impatient with it.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, now the matter which is considered, or which has to be considered by the conference, is that the changing of paragraph 131, Rule 31, namely that the decision of the conference on all substantive matter shall be taken by two-thirds majority of the representative present and voting, should be amended to read, to change it to by simple majority. Whether this question in deciding that should be considered as a substantive question or it's a procedural question. First of all, the conference will decide on that. And this is a procedural question.
Yes. Question whether it's procedural or substantive, right?
Mexico.
The distinguished representative of Mexico on a point of order.
Gracias, maestro. ¿Cuál es el artículo que había visto?
Está en la última. Está en la última.
56. Señor presidente.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. I think the way in which the Secretary of the Conference is submitting this point to the vote could lead to misunderstanding. I believe that what is being put to the vote is not the amendment to this article, but rather the application of this article. That is to say, the conference will decide that something else be done, because if it's a matter of the amendment, then there would come into play Article 56 of the Rules of Procedure, which says that for amendments of it, it requires a two-thirds majority. In our understanding, the proposal of the delegate of Pakistan refers to the need, or appeals to the vote of the conference, for it to decide, in accordance with the first paragraph of Article 31, whether by the vote something else shall be decided other than what this provides, and not precisely the amendment as was proposed by the Secretary of the Conference for being voted on by this conference. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. I perhaps should refer to Rule 16, in which it states the President shall rule on points of order and, subject to those rules, have complete control of the proceedings over the maintenance of order thereat. I am suggesting that under Rule 31, Section 3, that the proposal put forth by the distinguished representative of Pakistan is a matter of substance and not of procedure, and I declare it a matter of the proposal itself, a matter of substance, and I ask the conference to decide that, whether or not the proposal itself is a question of substance. In my view, as chairman, it is a matter of substance, and I must ask the conference to decide. Those in, I have to be very careful here, those in favor of the ruling that it is a matter of substance will please raise their hands. The voting has started.
Sur le vote, Monsieur le Président, nous sommes dans la confusion. Nous ne savons pas sur quoi voter.
forget the Netherlands. I must apologize to distinguished delegates. There has been a point of order raised. I was referring to Rule 35 that had been raised by the distinguished delegate from Israel, which says after the President has announced the commencement of voting, no representative may interrupt the voting except on a point of order in connection with the actual process of voting. The distinguished representative from Tunisia has now, of Libya, has now raised a point of order. I presume it's in connection with the actual process of voting.
Clarify, Mr. President.
Yes, I please wish you would.
السيد الرئيس إن طلبي لنقطة نظامية هي
Mr. President, I raised a point of order on the procedure of the vote. According to what you said, you put to the vote the amendment presented by the delegation of Pakistan, and we proceeded to vote. So we have to vote first on the amendment of Pakistan. Thank you, sir.
No, that is not my ruling. I was ruling that on a question of simple majority that should apply to matters of substance. I say this is, first of all, it's a matter of substance and not procedure. And that was the first question raised, as I understand it. I will ask for the guidance of our legal counsel if there is any further question, and I now call on the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, sir. On a point of order, and once again, I regret for having to speak. Mr. President, we're in the most total confusion, and I'd really like to know on what I'm voting when you propose something to be put to the vote. It seems to me that the first proposal was made by Pakistan. It was made even before reference was made to Rule 35. Secondly, it's a question of pure procedure. I really don't see how the way in which we vote can today become a question of substance. Thirdly, we are ready, sir, to help you. But we must be told before we vote what we're voting on. The proposal is as follows, are the following. Proposal of Pakistan, the ruling of the President cannot come up here. It's a matter of applying a rule which is very clear. Other proposal we can consider afterwards. So we would request, sir, that you would, if you would clarify that we are voting on the Pakistan proposal. That is to say, that Rule 31 in paragraph 1 will not be applied, and we shall apply the simple majority. This is the Pakistan proposal, and it's a question of procedure. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate the confusion of the distinguished delegate from Tunisia and share it. To help clarify, I had made a ruling there is an appeal to my ruling by the distinguished delegate from Iraq, then it is necessary to clarify my ruling by the wish of the conference in that respect. So we are now dealing with my ruling that it was a matter of substance challenged by or questioned by the distinguished delegate from Iraq, and we're now voting on my ruling that indeed we were dealing in the proposal with a matter of substance. I believe the distinguished representative from Ireland has a point of order.
Mr. Chairman, I hesitate to intervene, but I should just like to remind you about Rule 56, which applies, which states that the rules of procedure may be amended by a decision of the conference by a two-thirds majority of the representative present at voting, after the General Committee has reported on the proposed amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I don't think that's an amendment, it's an interpretation, and I believe it carries a simple majority. It's an application without applying them. It's an interpretation, and I interpret it as the proposal of the distinguished delegate from Cuba as a matter of substance, and I would like a ruling on that now. I'm sorry that the confusion has arisen, but I ask your indulgence. I don't necessarily ask your support, I just ask for your decision. Those in favor of the ruling that this is a matter of substance on which we're voting, please raise their hands. Mr. Secretary, please start counting. I now ask for those who vote against the ruling. Please raise their hands. Abstentions, please. The vote is not quite the same as the opening of the conference. In favor 30, against 59, abstentions 6. And before I turn over to the Vice President, I would like to ask for the vote on the proposal itself, which will be carried or rejected by a simple majority. Is that quite clear? We're voting on the proposal. The next vote then is on whether all future decisions are a matter of a simple majority. I have a point of order from the Federal Republic of Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was going to make a point of order referring to Rule 33 of the Rules of Procedures, because if I remember correctly, if now we are going to, as I understood, to take a vote on the amendment presented by Cuba, the distinguished delegate by the net. Okay.
I'm sorry. The proposal is on the proposal of the distinguished representative of Pakistan that now all matters be decided before this conference by a simple majority. This is what we are voting on now. Is that perfectly clear? Point of order, Federal Republic of Germany. Point of order from the Federal Republic of Germany.
President, if that were the case, I strongly believe, and supporting the view of my distinguished colleague from Ireland, that in this case we were dealing with an amendment of the rules of procedure, and certainly Rule 56 would be applicable. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Federal Republic of Germany. Point of order from the distinguished representative of Israel.
Mr. President, I second the view held by the distinguished delegate of the Federal Republic of Germany, and I wish to add that I think there can be no vote on this suggestion by the Pakistani delegation, because this vote is contrary to Rule 56. Therefore, we should conclude with our business as before.
I thank the distinguished representative of Israel. The distinguished representative of India.
Microphone, please.
I have to excuse or ask the distinguished representative of India, if you'd mind, until the microphone is operating.
Rule 56 by the distinguished delegate of Israel. Rule 56 talks of an amendment of the rules of procedure. My submission is that in this case, we are not amending the rules of procedure at all. We are now taking action under Rule 31. Rule 31 itself enables us, if we so decide, to take a vote by a simple majority. We are not amending that rule at all. That rule remains. That rule enables in particular cases or whenever this House so decides to decide a matter by a simple majority. We are not amending that rule. We are only exercising the option which we have under that rule. Therefore, Rule 56 doesn't come into position at all. We will act under 31, and that 31 gives us the right to act under, according to a simple procedure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I must say that it is my view that we are applying the rules, not amending the rules. This is a perfectly legitimate application of the rules in which we have proceeded to a clarification. So we now have the proposal from the distinguished representative of Pakistan that all matters before this conference be handled with a simple majority.